Where are you, God? Have you abandoned us? Have you forgotten about us? If the psalmist can cry out in desperation with cries like these, surely we can too. Too often as Jesus' people, we skip grief because we know how the story ends. But Jesus didn't skip grief, and he knew how the story ends. Jesus didn't skip grief when he was at Lazarus' grave, or when he was overlooking Jerusalem, weeping, or when he was hanging from a cross, crying out the words of Psalm 22, "Why have you abandoned me?" And if Jesus didn't skip grief, we don't need to skip grief either. Good Friday is the day we remember Jesus' death on the cross. And we can be guilty of skipping grief even on Good Friday. I mean, we call it Good Friday. And there are so many reasons why Good Friday is good. The Apostle Paul writes in Romans chapter 5, verse 8, that God proves his love for us, and that while we were still sinners, Jesus died for us. And this means God loves us no more, no less on our very worst days as on our very best days. And that is good news. But I want to point to an often overlooked way in which Good Friday is good. You see, I think we can get it in our minds that God is far away. That God is far removed from our pain. That God is far removed from our suffering. That God is far removed from our grief. But that's not the picture the Bible writers paint for us. The gospel writer John writes in John 1:14 that God took on flesh in Jesus and made his dwelling among us. The Apostle Paul writes in Colossians chapter 1 verse 15 that Jesus is the image, the picture of the invisible God. The author of Hebrews writes in Hebrews chapter 1 verse 3 that Jesus is the radiance of God's glory, the exact representation of his being. You want to know what God is like? Look at Jesus. And this is good news. Want to know what God is like? Look at Jesus, hanging on a cross, grieving. My God, why have you abandoned me? Jesus, our God, is no stranger to our grief. He's no stranger to our heartache. He's no stranger to our suffering. Jesus, our God, is not far away, but he's come near. He knows what it's like to grieve, and he wants to walk through our grief with us. We don't have to skip grief, because in our grief, we can meet our God. And this is good news.